Good morning, Shane and Chris here from the Right Spotters. So today's subject, we're talking about how words matter and how particular phrases matter. Chris got into it during the week on Threads. Somebody read the first sentence of what he said, that walking is not exercise, and they didn't read the rest of what he said, and it was off to the races on the internet. The internet can be a brutal place, particularly when people don't read your words right. So today we are talking about how words matter, how phrasing matters, how the use of jargon matters, and how some words should probably never be used in an article. So Chris, why don't we talk a little bit about how that little incident you had this week about exercise not being walking, not being exercise. See, I got that the wrong way around.
Yeah, sure. So first, this is not an apology video because I have nothing to apologize for. Long story short, too late. I wrote that walking is not exercise unless you're deconditioned. Otherwise, walking is general physical activity. So I was highlighting a difference between exercise and activity. And the internet did not take that well. A lot of people would think the words are basically synonymous, like exercise and activity. They're one and the same, but not really. Like activity is physical activity, moving around, dicing potatoes, gardening. That's not an exercise stimulus unless you are currently out of shape. Then it's challenging enough to be exercise. It's going to sound almost like semantics and like nitpicking, but it's really not, because like Shane said, words matter. So if you tell somebody to go start exercising, any little bit helps, but there's exercise and then there's activity. So that's whatever. That's where I was getting at. The bigger picture as a whole, if we kind of zoom out, is that, again, words matter. Word choices matter. When you're talking to an audience, you need to make sure they understand what you're trying to say. And you can't presume that I wrote this, and of course it's clear, nobody could possibly misunderstand. But if there's any vagueness, if you're speaking broadly, if you use terms interchangeably that you just assume people are going to know the difference, you're creating confusion. You're not making an easy to read piece of content. And you always want your information to be easy to read and easy to understand. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect. So I think you're also probably talking about like congruency, right? Making sure everything one follows the other, particularly if if you're going to use the word posterior chain throughout an article, then you don't use the word back and hammies. You just keep using that same word all throughout.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And that actually, we've mentioned this before, that if you're writing about the posterior chain, you can't assume your readers know what that is unless you define it. If you say posterior chain, parentheses, lower back, glutes, hamstrings, blah, 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 then you can continue using the term to make sure everybody's on the same playing field. I've seen some people that consider the posterior chain just glutes and hamstrings, not lower back, which is wrong.
Yeah.
But if you're writing, and that comes back to also to knowing your audience. If you're writing for a general population and the majority of your readers are not experienced in the gym, you need to clarify what the posterior chain is, or just don't use the term. Use glutes and hamstrings. If you're writing for a publication that is focused on experienced lifters, like Elite FTS deals with powerlifters, if you're writing for your blog and the majority of your clientele is experienced lifters, you can probably get away with just saying posterior chain. So you need to know your audience, and if you're going to use a term, explain it. You might need to explain it.
Yeah, and usually in an article, say in the fitness article with the word posterior chain, if you define it at the start, then it's just so much easier to use throughout the article. But if you don't, then it's confusing. So not only do words matter, but context matters. So you give the reader a little bit of context, and then everything else just flows from that. So it's like it's like using abbreviations. Like, you don't when you're writing range of motion, you always write out that full word range of motion at the start, and then the rest of the article you just go ROM, and everybody knows what that means. But if you start off with ROM, nobody knows what you're talking about.
Yep, definitely. That's like you can't assume readers know what that is. You can't. That's just basic writing. You can't throw in shortcuts and abbreviations unless you clarify them. And once you do, then the shortcut is fair game. Like that's fundamental writing, whether it's fitness writing or not.
Yeah. Another, I mean, and this probably, I don't know, this is just me, but the words all, always, never should never be used in any fitness article, particularly when it comes to the human. This is a real bugbear of mine when I read stuff and somebody says never, always, or something, a word that's definitive, that means 100%, because nothing is ever 100%, right? I read that and go, well, words matter. That just, the human body just doesn't work like that. You can say almost always or something along those lines if there's a rare case, but people who use those words, it's just wrong. That's my little thing. That really bugs me. And if I catch myself doing that, I could during the editing process, I always take it out. I mean, always, because I don't. And when if you use words that are 100% definitive, you have to back it up, right? You can't just drop a bomb and go and just leave it alone. That's where words really matter.
I think definitely. I think talking in absolutes, like you're saying, it's very dangerous territory, because you're putting a very finite point on a topic that has a lot of nuance. Like a lot of exercise and nutrition, like it depends, is a very valid factor a lot of the time. Like if you say you should always touch your chest at the bottom of a bench press, like no. It depends on shoulder mobility, depends on your goal. Maybe you want to, like a two-board press is a thing. Yeah. Or a spotto press, invisible two-board. So talking in absolutes is very dangerous. That's why we don't like them in titles. Like 4 exercises you should never do. That's eye-catching title.
That's good clickbait, though. It's good clickbait.
It's very clickbait because it's not factually correct. There are no exercises you should never do. There are things like often and generally and sometimes. These wiggle words.
Wiggle words. I like that. Wiggle words.
Yes.
That's good one.
Like that's a thing.
Yeah. It
gives you leeway to take people's various situations into consideration. Because you're talking, if you're anything you publish on the internet, it's worldwide. There should eventually be a lot of different people that read it. So you can't, or you don't want to paint with a one single broad brush to cover everybody in every situation. Just like, if you're training clients in a gym, you're not going to give every single client the exact same exercise suggestions for the exact same sets and reps with the exact same weight. Because people are kind of different.
That's true.
So in your writing, you need to take that into consideration.
I think that's another bugbear of mine, particularly when it comes to, our world, that people who basically say there is only one way to do a squat, there is only one way to do a bench press, and this is the way. We won't name names, but I think they're pretty obvious who those people are. That just bothers me immensely. And then they use research to back up their point. It's just like, whatever, dude, you're still wrong. Right? Because the human, like with writing, it's nuanced, like the human body. It's the same thing, right? So I think that goes back to knowing your audience as well, with what words you choose, where you choose it. But what never changes is context, right? Whatever you write, and if you're going to write something controversial, like what you did was kind of semi-controversial, you back it up, right? You back it up, and that's fine. Like, again, we just careful. Words matter, and this is where kind of where the right spotters come in with editing, because that kind of gets, you have somebody else to read through your work, and they can pick those things out for you.
I think, yes, definitely editing is a big part of it, and self-editing and watching the way you write, and like you said, the way you phrase things. One issue that I've seen kind of often, I've always seen it. I've seen kind of often, when trainers are talking about working on an incline or using any kind of angles or foot position, I've seen a lot of people say, set your feet 20 degrees at a 20-degree angle. Set your arms set your elbows at a 15 to 20-degree angle. I'm not in a gym.
Protractor out during exercise. Come on, let's go.
Exactly. We don't have protractors. Less math, the better. So set your feet at a slight angle. Angle your arms slightly outward. I know we learned in the textbooks that a 15-degree incline bench works more upper pecs, and higher, a 30 to 45 degree works more front shoulders. But that kind of accuracy, it's almost like accuracy is working against you.
Yeah.
Like it's not a practical piece of advice. So changing your phrasing from 20-degree angle to a slight angle, slight angles, like that's what we're talking about. Changing your phrasing to make it more user-friendly.
I think when particularly with exercise descriptions and when we're talking about angles, there's only two things you should use, and that's 45-degree and 90. People know what they are. People can visualize a 45-degree angle, right? And they can visualize 90, right? That's easy. If we're going to be talking angles and inclines and declines, that's the only probably two things you should use, right? 45 and 90, because people can actually picture that. Like we say, we'll get into a hip flexor stretch and we'll get our knees at a 90-degree angle. People know what that is automatically, even if you're not mathematically inclined, right? But if you start getting tomato and saying 15, 20, whatever, and I personally haven't seen it, but I believe it happens. You're just getting lost in the details, right?
Yeah, definitely.
When we need to, zoom out and into the bigger picture. But yeah, that's just my little bugbear. That's the only, if I'm talking angles, that's the only two angles I use.
I mean, that makes sense. I like avoiding numbers at all costs. So I use slight or you do what you can.
That's an excellent point too.
It all comes back to making sure that the readers understand what you're trying to say. They shouldn't have to take extra steps to translate what you're saying into, okay, so let me see if I got this right, and then reread it and revisualize, and you're putting stumbling blocks up in their way, and that's the last thing you want to do as a fitness writer, to get your information across.
Yeah, that's true. I think a good exercise for fitness writers is the art of writing exercise descriptions. Now, I've written a lot. You have to do it in a particular. I mean, it's very easy to describe an exercise on a video, but it's a different thing to describe an exercise in words. And I think a good drill for fitness writers is to write exercise descriptions. In fact, if they're watching this video, go write one now. The more you write exercise descriptions and the better you can get at it, the more clear you can get at it, the better your writing will be, just period.
I think that's a great litmus test, is to check your skill and your ability to translate what you've told people face to face dozens or hundreds of times, and get that same message on the screen. That's a basic fitness writing 101. How to do a squat, how to do a deadlift. See if you can do it in 500 words, 1,000 words, whatever. But that's an excellent suggestion.
Yeah,
Good call.
no, it's taken me a while to be able to condense a certain exercise into, say, 5 or 6 lines of directions, right? But you have to be, what we're talking about, words may have to be clear and to the point and avoid confusion, right?
While still also a big point is also you can't lose information. You can't lose key points because you need to figure out what the essential parts of exercise technique are and still convey them. You can't skip any steps. You can't forget to tell someone where their feet should be or how to grab the bar or things like that. So it's really a good way to see how sharp you are at translating your knowledge into writing.
Yeah. So after you've watched this video, go write some exercise descriptions.
That's your homework. That's a homework for today. One thing I also want to touch on in terms of word choice and phrasing, you have some options because there are a lot of different ways to say the same thing. So if you can tell somebody, squeeze your ass, or contract your glutes, or engage your posterior chain, that's 3 different ways to say the same thing. But the one you choose will be based on your writing voice, your voice as a writer, which you're most comfortable saying. It'll also be influenced by the outlet that you're writing for. Like if you're writing for publication, they might not want you telling people to squeeze their ass. They might want to tone it down a little bit. Like not everybody is okay with that kind of PG language, PG-13 language. So you have a lot of different ways to play with your wording and your phrasing, but there are a lot of factors that will go into making the right choice. It's still the same information being delivered, but the way you deliver it will be dependent upon several different factors.
That still trips me out a lot. That still trips me out. Yeah, using that word glutes is one word that, yeah, every time I try and describe it, I get tripped up. I don't know quite what to do. I don't know why. I mean, okay, I'm going to go off track here. We're going to get a good laugh. So with clients, because a beginning client, when you tell them to engage their glutes, they have no idea what you're talking about. So if we're writing in an article, engage your glutes, if we're writing for Elite FTS or we're writing for Muscle and Fitness or Barbend, people who read that will know what you're talking about, right? But to a complete beginner, you're like, engage your glutes is like, well, what does that mean? So that's where context come in. So with clients in person, I tell them to squeeze like it's their second day in prison, and they look at me, and I said, the first day they're just getting to know you. It's terrible, and I've even said that to women. But you know what? It drives home the point, right? It's like when you say to a beginning lifter, squeeze your armpits. Well, what does that mean? Well, why don't you put a piece of paper in there and keep it there? Right? Context.
Right. I think Tony Gentilcore was the first one I saw to use for deadlift specifically to engage your lats. He said, imagine you're squeezing an orange in your armpit.
Oh, I love that.
I think I'm going to credit Gentilcore as being the first time I saw that written. So,
yeah. No, I think yeah.
But that's a great point. And again, it ties back to making sure people can translate your writing into the real world. Like a lot of times, a cue for like upper back tightness is to depress your shoulder blades. And that's like not a thing. To most people on the street, be like, what? But chuck your shoulder blades in your back pocket.
I love that one.
I see that all the time because it's a more practical cue. Gareth Sapstead, who we were just talking about a minute ago, I've seen him cue a hip hinge, which is, you know, for a deadlift, Romanian deadlift, whatever. Close the car door behind you.
I like that one.
Everybody's done that.
Before.
Yep, everybody's done that.
Yeah.
Yep, you just bump it with your tailbone, and that's a hip hinge. Visual images that you write about, that you create with your writing, are much easier than the technical terms of depressing your shoulder blades, recruiting your lats. Like, the average person will get much more from a easy to visualize cue than the technical terminology.
Isn't that right? That's a really great point, right? If we can if particularly when we're describing exercise or describing how the benefits of it, being visual with your words is a great idea. And that just comes with practice, right? And that just comes with coaching experience. And again, we've talked about that we already have the knowledge in here. We just have to get it out there. So good coaching is good writing. Good writing is good coaching. They feed into each other.
That's it. They do, because it's like we say all the time. You're working with your clients all the time. You're giving them these same cues. You just have to write it out now. You have to type it out instead of saying it to them. And it's use the same phrasing that you might use in the gym. You know, in the gym, you have the benefits of being one-on-one and being more tactile and poking them in the shoulder blades and saying these. But you need to figure out a way to get that onto the page so that everybody can benefit from your knowledge, even if they're not with you in person.
So I think so we've covered context matters, being visual with your words, never use the words never, always, and all. What else have we covered?
We covered visualization. We covered don't get too technical, avoid jargon. Yep, you're not always talking to experienced lifters, but you need to get the same information across.
Yes, we got to know our audience.
It's all standard stuff. It's the basics work, which you know as a trainer. The basics work. The basic writing stuff works. Know your audience and write so that they understand you. Done.
And I think, like I said before, once they start reading this video, go write some exercise descriptions. And send them to us.
Send it to us where? How can somebody send us a message, Shane?
Well, they can send us a message at therightspotters@gmail.com and The Right Spotters on Instagram and The Right Spotters on Facebook. We're just everywhere, dude. We're just everywhere. Cool. But yeah, we always available to help.
We will critique and constructively criticize your work, and just reach out. We're here, and we will catch you guys next time. Sound good?
Sweet. See you guys. Until next time.